Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Build Insights video. Today we'll be taking a look at the build out for the Pantheon and Baths of Agrippa in Rome. The Pantheon is one of the rare structures to have been remarkably well preserved since antiquity, in stark contrast to the Baths of Agrippa, to which it was once attached, and of which we know very little. This is the 8th subsection of Phase 3 in my years-long effort to recreate all of ancient Rome, circa mid-4th century CE. This subsection consists of about 5,100 bricks, bringing the running total for the entire SPQR diorama to more than 268,000. It connects directly to the Saepta Iulia featured in the previous video, and continues our exploration of the Campus Martius area of Rome. A quick shout out to all my members over on Patreon who help to support my work. These projects take many months to realize, and patrons get to see every step along the way, like the digital design insights for the Pantheon and Baths of Agrippa, which were shared all the way back in January 2025. It's also worth mentioning I don't do ad reads or any sponsored content despite near constant requests, so if you find my work to be valuable and you'd like to return some of that value by becoming a member on Patreon, you'll find a link in the description. What do you see when you close your eyes and imagine the ancient past? Perhaps visions of golden ornamentation and impossibly captured poses rendered in crisp statuary. But what can you glean of the background, the setting for all the trappings and fine objects? You might not have a specific landmark in mind, but it's likelier than not that the surrounding architecture assumes a Platonic likeness, which can be distilled to those two most primal elements, the circle and the square. The Pantheon in Rome is one of the most enduringly iconic landmarks of antiquity, and is certainly the most well-preserved large building of its time. It succeeds on several fronts, most obviously in its remarkable durability, but also in its unrivaled structural innovations, and most importantly, I would argue, its transcendent harmonizing of the circle and the square. We find these ideal forms at the very foundation of every found object, every work of art, and every architectural plan across every culture in recorded history. I tend to be reticent towards superlatives altogether, but when it comes to the Pantheon, it's my all-time favorite structure because of the quintessential interlocking of the two most basic elements of design, echoing across time and a lofty interior vault. I began designing the Pantheon all the way back in December 2024, and the footage here was taken the following August. It's not always the case that the physical build-out of my reconstructions echoes the order of the digital design, but in this case, both processes worked from the ground up. The diameter of the circular rotunda measures about 192 feet, which resulted in a circle approximately 12 by 12 studs at 1:650 scale. The circular walls of the rotunda were built using 1 by 2 rounded plates, the studs of which perfectly circumscribed the outer edge of a fixed 11 by 11 circular Technic girder. This yellow girder was embedded below street level, and the daisy chain of rounded plates were turned upside down to remain perfectly locked in position. The rest of the rotunda walls above this had to be reoriented in the studs up direction, but we'll see more of that later on. The portico of the Pantheon juxtaposes the primal square element against the circular rotunda when viewed from the top down. The entire portico, much like every major Roman temple, was significantly elevated above street level, and it's likely the pair of steps leading up to the Pantheon were paved in marmo giallo antico from Numidia. The elongated ancient porch has been lost to time as the portico is now level with the surrounding streets, but we can get a glimpse of this extra height if we explore either side of the Pantheon today. With the encircling girder and rotunda walls in place, I added strategically placed bar elements strung through the hollow studs of the rounded plates. These bars ensured a seamless transition from the inverted plates nestled around the girder below and the studs up plates which continue the rotunda walls above. The portico features slabs of inlaid gray granite circles and squares alternating along aisles and 3 naves. These tiles can still be seen today just behind the columns of the portico. At this scale, it's rare to find an interior space vast enough to include some interior details, but ancient Roman architecture was nothing if not an architecture of interiors. The tiled floor mainly consists of 3 patterns, alternating circles of red porphyry and gray granite squared by giallo antico, and outlined squares of red porphyry, all of which is set within pavanozzetto. I designed these unique tiles in Adobe Illustrator, and it was the folks at Minifig FX who masterfully printed all 71 custom tiles, along with pretty much every other tiny inscription and custom printed elements throughout the SPQR diorama. The rotunda of the Pantheon rose alongside the construction of the Basilica of Neptune, located directly behind it. The Basilica di Nettuno provided much-needed buttressing to the side of the rotunda opposite the portico, and it's likely thanks to this little-known structure that the Pantheon has endured for nearly 2 millennia. The Pantheon is typically dated to the reign of Hadrian, having been completed by 126 CE, but we now know that both structures were begun under the reign of Trajan due to the presence of dated brick stamps discovered in the walls of these lower levels. This further cements Apollodorus of Damascus as the project's most likely chief architect, but you wouldn't have wanted Hadrian to hear you say that. If you know, you know. The rotunda walls had to rise several layers before I could begin installing the columns, representing the 7 interior aediculi, or niches. The alternating light yellow and light slate gray columns represent giallo antico and pavonazzetto, respectively. Both of these colors are unique to Go Bricks and certainly help to better represent the exotic materials used throughout the interior of the Pantheon. The structure of the Pantheon Rotunda has been the subject of countless studies over the centuries. The limitations of the 1:650 scale used here prevented the incorporation of a full circular wall, but that certainly doesn't come at the expense of a legible structural representation. Quite the opposite, as it turns out. It's best to think of the rotunda wall as a circular bridge or a 3-level Roman aqueduct. Like an aqueduct, the vertical walls feature discharging arches over openings like niches and entryways, and relieving arches embedded within the solid masonry. In the horizontal plane, the niches along the interior walls act as horizontal arches of their own, much like the cross-section of cardboard. The result was a robust diaphragm which, in combination with the entry portico and the Basilica of Neptune on either end, have preserved the Pantheon to this day. I used wheel-well elements to embellish the 3 levels of vertical arches. At the real Pantheon, the relieving arches are clearly visible along the exterior of the rotunda, but it's not quite clear to what extent the exterior was embellished, aside from the likeliest explanation that it was mostly covered in white plaster. The Roman concrete used at the center of the walls was a mix of lime and pozzolana, a kind of volcanic ash. It's only recently come to light that the exact mixture of these 2 aggregates causes a chemical reaction in which the lime calcifies and seals cracks whenever water seeps in from the outside. I'm no chemist, but basically that's why Roman concrete could cure underwater and why it actually strengthens under most weathering conditions. The portico of the Pantheon would have been this Roman monument's front porch. Large niches on either side of the entrance once held giant statues of Augustus and Marcus Agrippa. It was Agrippa, after all, who was largely responsible for the construction of the first Pantheon, which preceded the one rebuilt in even greater fashion under Trajan and Hadrian. The original Pantheon portico was likely Deca-style with 10 columns across the front. The current successor structure is octa-style, featuring 8 columns of gray granite across the front and 8 columns of pink granite framing the naves. Each of these column shafts were monolithic and sourced from Egyptian quarries in Aswan and at Mons Claudianus. Despite their exotic origins, imposing heights of 40 Roman feet, and considerable weights of nearly 60 tons each, these 16 columns were probably not what was intended. More on that later, so stay tuned. The inscription along the architrave of the Pantheon was likely reused from the original structure built by Agrippa. The inscription is still clearly visible to this day, and it's one of the most direct, visibly written connections to the ancient past in Rome today, aside from all the hieroglyphs on the numerous Egyptian obelisks. What you won't find on the portico today, however, are any traces of the ancient gold and bronze. The famous bronze trusses, which once spanned the naves, represented here using treasure chest lids, were stripped from the monument by Pope Urban VIII in 1625. The church claimed it was recast into the baldacchino of St. Peter's by Gian Lorenzo Bernini, but the reality is that it became literal cannon fodder, as nearly all of it was recast into cannons for defense of the city. Other patrons of the Barberini Pope notoriously stripped much of the remaining marble from the Colosseum for use in the construction of Palazzo Barberini. The popular backlash against the Barberini Pope's desecration of these ancient sites led to the emergence of the popular phrase, "Quod non fecerunt barbari, fecerunt barbarini." What the barbarians did not do, the Barberini did. Now that we've nearly made it to the dome of the Pantheon, it's a good time to discuss the actual function of the Pantheon. The short explanation is that there's no consensus on the matter. It's generally assumed to have been a temple dedicated to all the gods, but is also just as likely to have aligned with the cult of a particular imperial dynasty, such as that of Augustus and the gens Julia. It would have undoubtedly provided a suitable setting for the living emperors to appear alongside visages of their deified predecessors. Emperor Hadrian, as one example, is known to have convened the Senate at the Pantheon on at least one occasion. And speaking of Hadrian, we're left to wonder whether he finished the Pantheon in a rush. This theory is due to the mismatch between the actual portico pediment and the trabeations above, which were seemingly intended for a higher roofline. This has led to any number of hypothetical reimaginings of the Pantheon, where columns of 50 Roman feet were used in place of the existing 40 Roman feet columns. The difference in logistics here is actually quite astounding, since a difference of only 10 Roman feet would have required monolithic columns of twice the weight, or around 120 tons each. Columns of such size were rare, but not unheard of for 2nd century Rome. So rather than imagining 16 enormous Egyptian granite columns somewhere at the bottom of the Mediterranean, it's more likely that the wrong sizes were ordered or cut, and Hadrian decided it was better to make do with what they had, rather than delay construction while waiting for new columns. I guess we'll never know for sure. The awe-inspiring dome of the Pantheon can only truly be experienced from the interior. Overall, the distance from the floor to the top of the roof is as wide as it is tall. The interior of the dome itself is also hemispherical, placed precisely halfway up the building's full height. This is one aspect of its design that I made sure to capture from the outset. The dome itself went through several design iterations before I settled on two options, which I then agonized over for a couple months. In the end, the final version uses a series of smaller and smaller radius dish elements, evoking the exterior bracing ribs near the top of the dome. The entire dome was likely gilded in bronze, and it's thanks to the folks at Chrome Block City that I was able to have these particular bricks coated in metallic gold to look the part. Of course, the Pantheon wouldn't be complete without the oculus at its summit. While mine doesn't quite provide visibility to the interior, the dome does remain removable, offering glimpses of the richly decorated interior. There's honestly so much more about the Pantheon I didn't get the chance to talk about here, even despite documenting the build-out so extensively for a mere 2,000 bricks model. So I'd highly recommend further reading, especially The Pantheon From Antiquity to Present by Todd A. Martyr and Mark Wilson Jones. The Baths of Agrippa were the very first public thermae built in Rome. The baths were part of a broad public work site undertaken by Marcus Agrippa during the late 1st century BCE. Eventually connected to the Pantheon and sited firmly within the Campus Martius, the Thermæ Agrippæ were reconstructed on several occasions, either due to destructions by fire or by gradual deterioration over the centuries. Its novelty as the first Roman public bathing complex is entwined with its elusive building plan, resulting in a number of conflicting reconstructions, painting a thorny picture of the overall scheme. It's often rather tricky bushwhacking my way through conflicting reconstructions to come up with my own iteration. I relied quite heavily on the drawings of architects like Andrea Palladio in reconstructing the Baths of Constantine and the Baths of Titus from Phase 2. But Palladio's drawings of the supposed Baths of Agrippa are far too sprawling and, quite frankly, anachronistic, since they have more in common with the late imperial Thermæ than they do with the known remains of the asymmetrical and prototypical Baths of Agrippa. But I can also respect the creative liberties Palladio took, likely based on the best information available at the time. I'd probably be more concerned if Palladio never put forth a reconstruction as fantastical as one of Piranesi's or Robert's reimaginings of ancient architecture. The latter's series of 4 such larger-than-life exaggerations just so happen to be my favorite works at the Art Institute of Chicago. The Baths of Agrippa were the prototypical imperial Thermæ of Rome. Like most Roman architecture, it's likely that the introduction of this large public amenity was directly informed by Greek traditions. In fact, the colloquial name for the Baths of Agrippa was the Laconicum, which was used interchangeably when the complex first opened in 25 BCE. If this nickname sounds at all eponymous, then you're probably thinking of Laconia, the Greek region of the Peloponnese Peninsula that was once home to Sparta. The Laconica were the only form of warm baths that the Spartans permitted, and the Romans never missed an opportunity to more closely associate themselves with the ancient legacies of their own time. The Laconicum would eventually become synonymous with the Roman caldarium, or heated baths, and the presence of at least 2 of these rooms beneath similar, if not identical, domed roofs is already pushing the extent of our knowledge of this site. The parcel of land running alongside the Baths of Agrippa and the Pantheon were a bit of a blank slate. In most serious reconstructions of 4th century Rome, this spot in the Campus Martius is either the site of various temples which had not yet been more firmly located, or just left undeveloped altogether. Neither of these options were particularly ideal, so I decided it was time to balance the scales by placing gardens inspired by the Canopus at Hadrian's Villa. We do know that the Campus Martius was home to several Horti, or sprawling leisure gardens, and it's not unreasonable to assume they might have been located next to a leisurely complex like the Baths of Agrippa. What's more is that Hadrian is already known to have redeveloped the Basilica of Neptune and parts of the Thermæ Agrippæ during the construction of the Pantheon. Perhaps some of the more luxurious design aspects of his private villa outside the city could have wound up in the city center as well. I hope you enjoyed these insights into the Pantheon and Baths of Agrippa. If you'd like to see even more behind-the-scenes insights, you can check out the exclusive posts over on my Patreon. Aside from supporting my work, Patreon membership also gets you early access to all these insights videos. Be sure to stay tuned for the next video, where we'll be taking a look at another unique Roman structure known as the Odium of Domitian. In the meantime, thanks for following along, and I'll see you in the next one.